There's a scene in The Godfather where Don Corleone says, "I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse." That line, that moment, isn't fiction. It's the Gambino family, and the real story is darker, stranger, and more resilient than anything Hollywood ever imagined. October 25th, 1957. Mid-morning, the Park Sheraton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Albert Anastasia walked into the barber shop on the ground floor like he'd done 100 times before. He was the most feared man in New York, the Lord High Executioner of the Mafia, the operational chief of Murder, Inc., a ghost from the decade when the mob killed for hire and never asked questions. He sat in chair number 4. The barber draped a hot towel over his face. Steam rose. The scent of bay rum cologne mixed with the sharp metallic tang of shaving cream. The radio played softly in the background. Morning traffic hummed outside. Anastasia closed his eyes. For a moment, the most dangerous man in America was vulnerable. 2 men walked in. They wore scarves over their faces. They didn't say a word. The first shot hit Anastasia in the back of the head. His eyes snapped open. He tried to stand. Another shot, then another. He lunged, not at his killers, but at their reflection in the mirror. He clawed at the glass, leaving streaks of blood on the surface, before collapsing onto the black and white checkered floor. The barbers ran. The shooters walked out calmly, disappearing into the Manhattan crowd. Anastasia died surrounded by shattered glass and the smell of gunpowder. The man who had orchestrated hundreds of murders couldn't escape his own. But here's the thing. Anastasia's death wasn't chaos. It was a business decision. And the man who ordered it? Carlo Gambino, the quietest, smartest, and most ruthless boss the American Mafia would ever see.
To understand the Gambino family, you have to go back to Sicily in the 1890s, where the Mafia wasn't a crime syndicate, it was survival. Feudal landlords controlled everything. Peasants had nothing. So they created their own system of justice, their own code. Omertà, silence, loyalty above all. Betrayal meant death. When Italians began flooding into America in the early 1900s, they brought that code with them. They settled in Harlem, in Brooklyn, in the Lower East Side. They spoke no English, they had no money, and they were prey. Irish gangs controlled the docks, Jewish gangs controlled gambling. The Italians were at the bottom, so they formed protection rackets, extortion, loan sharking. The mano nera, the Black Hand, was born. The first architect of what would become the Gambino family was a man named Ignazio Lupo. They called him the Wolf. He ran counterfeiting operations out of basements in East Harlem. He terrorized Italian shopkeepers demanding protection money. The method was simple. A letter would arrive, marked with a black handprint. Pay $500 or your store burns down. Pay $1,000 or your children disappear. Most paid. Those who didn't became examples. But Lupo got sloppy. In 1910, federal agents raided his operation and found printing presses churning out fake bills. He went to prison. The organization fractured. Into that vacuum stepped Salvatore d'Aquila. Toto, they called him. And Toto was different. He didn't just extort, he organized. He united the fragmented Sicilian gangs in Brooklyn under a single command structure. He established the first stable hierarchy: boss, underboss, capos, soldiers, a corporate model for crime. D'Aquila thrived during Prohibition. Bootlegging was a gold mine. Every speakeasy in New York needed liquor. D'Aquila controlled the supply chains. He made alliances with Irish and Jewish bootleggers. He eliminated rivals who refused to cooperate. For nearly 2 decades, he was untouchable. Until 1928. Joe Masseria, a rival boss from Manhattan, decided D'Aquila had too much power. On October 10, 1928, D'Aquila was shot to death on the corner of Avenue A. No witnesses, no arrests, just a message. The old order was over.
What followed was the Castellammarese War. It wasn't just a gang fight, it was a generational conflict. On one side, Joe Masseria and the old-school Sicilian bosses, the Mustache Petes, who believed in tradition, in blood vendettas, in settling scores the old way. On the other side, Salvatore Maranzano and the younger generation, the Young Turks, who saw the Mafia as a business, not a blood feud. The war was brutal. Over 60 men died in the streets of New York. Ambushes in restaurants, drive-by shootings on crowded avenues, bodies dumped in vacant lots, wrapped in canvas, left as warnings. The violence was so extreme that it threatened to bring down federal heat on everyone. Then a young gangster named Charles Lucky Luciano made a move. Luciano was smart. He realized that as long as the old bosses were in charge, the war would never end. So he orchestrated a double betrayal. First, he helped set up his own boss, Joe Masseria, who was shot to death in a Coney Island restaurant on April 15, 1931. Masseria was eating pasta when the bullets hit him. His plate shattered, red sauce mixed with blood on the checkered tablecloth. Then, just months later, Luciano turned on Maranzano, having him killed in his Manhattan office by men disguised as federal agents. With both old bosses dead, Luciano restructured the entire American Mafia. He created the Commission, a board of directors made up of the heads of the 5 families. No more wars. Disputes would be settled by vote. Territories would be respected. Violence would be regulated. The Mafia became a corporation. And one of those 5 families, that was Vincent Mangano's crew. The family that would one day bear the name Gambino. Vincent Mangano wasn't flashy. He didn't want attention. He wanted control. And he found it on the waterfront. The docks of Brooklyn and New Jersey were the economic arteries of New York. Every piece of cargo that came into the city passed through those docks. Coffee from South America, steel from Europe, textiles from Asia. Mangano saw the opportunity. He infiltrated the International Longshoremen's Association, the ILA, the union that controlled the dock workers. It was brilliant. Once you control the union, you control the docks. Once you control the docks, you control everything. Construction materials, imported goods, stolen cargo. Mangano's men decided which ships got unloaded, which trucks got through, which businesses stayed in operation. The system worked like this. A ship would arrive in port. The captain would receive a visit from a union representative. The representative would explain that loading and unloading required special coordination. That coordination cost money. A few $100s for a small shipment, thousands for a large one. If you paid, your cargo moved smoothly. If you didn't, suddenly there were labor disputes, strikes, delays. Your perishable goods rotted on the dock. Your time-sensitive materials missed their deadlines. Businesses learned quickly. Pay the mob or go bankrupt. But Mangano had a problem. His underboss, Albert Anastasia, was ambitious. Anastasia had been the operational head of Murder, Inc. during the 1930s and 40s, a contract killing service that carried out hits for the Commission. Anastasia was a weapon, but weapons are dangerous when they think for themselves. On April 19, 1951, Vincent Mangano disappeared. His car was found abandoned near the docks in Brooklyn. The engine was still running. The door was open. His body was never recovered. His brother Philip was found shot to death in a marsh in Brooklyn, his face unrecognizable, his hands bound with wire. No one was ever charged, but everyone knew. Anastasia had killed his boss and taken over. Albert Anastasia ruled through fear, pure, unfiltered terror. He didn't just kill enemies. He killed to send messages. He killed to maintain discipline. He killed because he could. And he had the infrastructure to do it. Murder, Inc. Murder, Inc. was the execution arm of the Mafia.
It operated out of a Brooklyn candy store called Midnight Roses. The system was elegant in its brutality. A boss would put out a contract. The contract would go to Anastasia. Anastasia would assign the job to one of his killers, men like Abe Kid Twist Reles, Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, or Martin Bugsy Goldstein. The killers didn't ask questions. They didn't know the victim. They just executed the order. Clean, professional, untraceable.
Between 1930 and 1940, Murder, Inc. carried out an estimated 400 to 1,000 murders. The exact number is unknown because many bodies were never found. Some were dumped in the ocean, weighted down with chains. Others were buried in construction sites, their graves paved over with fresh concrete. Some were dissolved in acid. The killers pioneered techniques that are still used today: the ice pick through the ear into the brain, leaving no external wound; the rope garrote, silent and efficient; the car trunk execution, where the victim was driven to a remote location and shot.
But Anastasia made mistakes. During his reign, he violated one of the Mafia's most sacred rules. He killed civilians. In 1952, a man named Arnold Schuster appeared on television after helping police capture a famous bank robber named Willie Sutton. Schuster wasn't involved in organized crime. He was just a civilian doing his civic duty. Anastasia saw him on TV and said, "I can't stand squealers. Hit him." Schuster was shot to death on a street corner in Brooklyn while walking home from work. The murder shocked the public and enraged the commission. You don't kill civilians. It brings heat. It brings investigations. It threatens everyone. But Anastasia didn't care. He believed he was untouchable. He believed his reputation alone would protect him.
He was wrong. Behind the scenes, his underboss, a quiet, calculating man named Carlo Gambino, was making alliances. Gambino reached out to Vito Genovese, another powerful boss who wanted Anastasia gone. Together, they planned the hit. And on that October morning in 1957, in that barbershop, the executioner was executed. Carlo Gambino walked out of the shadows and into the throne. Carlo Gambino was everything Anastasia wasn't: quiet, disciplined, patient. He lived in a modest two-story house in Brooklyn. He drove an old Buick. He avoided restaurants and nightclubs. He never gave interviews. He never appeared in newspapers. He was invisible, and that's exactly how he liked it. But make no mistake, Gambino was the most powerful mobster in America. Under his leadership, the family exploded in size and influence. At its peak, the Gambino family had over 300 made members and thousands of associates. They controlled rackets in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Florida, and California. They had ties to mobsters in Canada, Sicily, and South America. Gambino expanded into every profitable racket imaginable: gambling, loan sharking, labor racketeering, hijacking, drug trafficking, and most importantly, construction. In the 1960s and 70s, New York was booming. Skyscrapers were going up. Highways were being built. The city needed concrete, lots of it. Gambino and the other four families created something called the Concrete Club. It was a cartel, and it worked like this. If you wanted to pour concrete for a project worth more than $2 million in Manhattan, you couldn't just hire any company. You had to go through the Concrete Club. The club consisted of 6 companies, all controlled by the Mafia. The families would meet and decide which company would win the bid. The losing companies would submit intentionally high bids to make the chosen company look competitive. Then the winning company would add a 2% mob tax to the final invoice. 2% doesn't sound like much, but when you're talking about billion-dollar infrastructure projects, airports, office towers, housing developments, 2% is a fortune. The Trump Tower project alone generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in kickbacks. The Jacob Javits Convention Center? Millions.
The Concrete Club added an estimated $100 million to the cost of construction in New York during the 1980s, and every cent went into the pockets of the 5 families.
Gambino also controlled the garment district in Manhattan. His men infiltrated the trucking companies that moved clothing between factories and stores. If you wanted your shipment delivered on time, you paid. If you didn't, your goods disappeared. Entire fashion businesses went under because they refused to play ball. The family took a cut of every transaction, every delivery, every sale. But here's the genius of Carlo Gambino. He maintained plausible deniability. He never touched drugs publicly. He claimed the family had a strict no-narcotics policy. Anyone caught dealing heroin would be killed. It was a rule. It was the law. Except it wasn't true.
Behind the scenes, Gambino maintained close ties with his Sicilian cousins, the Inzerillo family in Palermo, who were key players in the French Connection heroin pipeline. The drugs flowed from Turkey to Sicily to New York. The money flowed back. Gambino never handled the drugs himself. He never met with the dealers, but he took his cut, always. And because he stayed in the background, he stayed clean. When Carlo Gambino died of natural causes in 1976, he died in his bed, surrounded by family, a free man. He had never been convicted of a major crime. He was the only boss of the 5 families to die of old age. And when he died, he handed the family to his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano.
Paul Castellano was not a gangster, at least not in the traditional sense. He was a businessman. He wore expensive suits tailored on Savile Row. He lived in a 17-room mansion in Staten Island that looked like a White House replica. They called it the White House because of its towering white columns and manicured lawns. He ran the family from a distance, preferring spreadsheets and profit margins to the bloody work of the streets. Castellano saw the Gambino family as a corporation, and in many ways he was right. By the late 1970s, the family had become a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. They controlled the poultry industry in New York. Castellano's company, Dial Poultry, had a virtual monopoly on chicken distribution to restaurants and supermarkets across the city. If you owned a restaurant in New York and you wanted to serve chicken, you bought from Dial. If you tried to buy from a competitor, suddenly your deliveries were delayed. Your health inspections became more frequent. Your permits were held up. You learned quickly, buy from Castellano or close your doors.
He expanded the Concrete Club even further. His son, Philip Castellano, ran Scaramix Concrete Corporation, which poured concrete for some of the biggest projects in the city. Trump Tower, the renovation of JFK Airport. Every one of those projects paid tribute to the mob. But Castellano had a fatal flaw. He was isolated. He rarely met with the soldiers, the men on the street doing the actual work. He demanded a bigger cut of their earnings, but gave them nothing in return. He operated from his mansion, surrounded by surveillance cameras and bodyguards, while his men risked their lives in Brooklyn and Queens. The soldiers resented him. They called him the Pope behind his back, a man so removed from reality that he might as well be living in the Vatican.
And then there was the drug issue. Castellano officially banned drug trafficking. Anyone caught dealing heroin would be killed, no exceptions. But his own men were violating that rule. A crew led by a charismatic capo named John Gotti was making a fortune selling heroin in Queens. The FBI had wiretaps, they had recordings, they had evidence, and Castellano knew it. He planned to dismantle Gotti's crew. He was going to kill them or kick them out. He scheduled a meeting for December 16, 1985, to deliver his verdict. But Gotti moved first. December 16, 1985, 5:25 p.m. Rush hour in Manhattan. Christmas shoppers filled the sidewalks, carrying bags from Macy's and Bloomingdale's. Holiday lights twinkled in store windows. Paul Castellano and his underboss, Thomas Bellotti, pulled up in front of Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th Street in a black Lincoln town car. It was supposed to be a routine meeting with other captains to discuss family business. Castellano stepped out of the passenger side. He was 70 years old, overweight, moving slowly. Bellotti came around from the driver's side. He was alert, scanning the crowd, his hand near his waistband where he kept his gun. 4 men in identical trench coats and white fur hats approached from different angles. They moved with precision, military precision. They had been waiting, watching, coordinating. The first shots came from behind. Castellano turned, confused. A bullet hit him in the head. He collapsed against the car. Another shot, then another. 6 rounds total. Bellotti tried to react, reaching for his weapon, but he was cut down before he could draw it. 7 shots, maybe 8. The sound echoed off the buildings like firecrackers. Shell casings bounced on the wet pavement. Blood pooled on the sidewalk, mixing with the slush and grime. The shooters didn't run. They walked, calmly, professionally. They handed their weapons to a man in a waiting car and disappeared into the holiday crowd. Shoppers screamed. Traffic stopped. By the time police arrived, Castellano and Bellotti were dead. Their bodies sprawled on the street, steam rising from their wounds in the cold December air.
And 3 blocks away, sitting in a car with tinted windows, watching the whole thing unfold, was John Gotti. He didn't pull the trigger. He didn't have to. He orchestrated it. He planned it. He approved it. And now, at 45 years old, he was the boss of the most powerful crime family in America. John Gotti was everything Carlo Gambino wasn't. Loud, flashy, visible. He wore hand-tailored suits that cost $5,000 each. He had his hair styled every day at a private salon. He held court at the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy, sitting outside on warm evenings, greeting fans and reporters like a celebrity. He smiled for cameras. He waved at crowds. He signed autographs. He acted like a movie star. Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano was Gotti's underboss. He was loyal, he was efficient, he was responsible for 19 murders, carried out personally or ordered on Gotti's behalf. Gravano was a true believer in the Mafia code, omertà. You never talk, you never cooperate. You go to prison, you keep your mouth shut, and the family takes care of your family. That was the deal. That was the honor. But then Gravano heard something that changed everything. On those FBI tapes, Gotti was blaming him for everything. Gotti was setting him up to take the fall. Gotti, the man Gravano had killed for, was throwing him under the bus to save himself. Gotti called Gravano stupid. He called him reckless. He said Gravano was the reason the FBI was investigating them. So Gravano made a decision that shattered the Mafia forever. He became a government witness. He broke omertà. In 1991, he sat in a federal courtroom and testified against John Gotti for 9 days. He described the inner workings of the family. He detailed murders, extortions, and rackets. He drew organizational charts showing the hierarchy of the Gambino family. He named names, he provided dates, locations, methods. He described how Gotti ordered the murder of Paul Castellano. He described how they planned it, how they executed it, how they celebrated afterward. It was devastating. Gotti's lawyers had no defense. The evidence was overwhelming. On April 2, 1992, John Gotti was convicted on 13 counts, including 5 murders, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, illegal gambling, and tax evasion. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gotti was sent to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, a supermax facility where he was locked in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. No visitors except lawyers, no phone calls, no contact with the outside world. He died there in 2002 from throat cancer, alone, forgotten by the empire he once ruled. But Gotti's fall was just the beginning. The federal government wasn't targeting one man, they were targeting the entire structure. The weapon they used was called RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Passed in 1970, RICO allowed prosecutors to go after entire criminal enterprises, not just individual crimes. Before RICO, you could only charge someone with a specific murder or extortion. The defendant would hire a good lawyer, claim they had an alibi, and often walk free. After RICO, you could charge them with being part of a criminal organization, and if you could prove they committed 2 or more crimes as part of that organization within a 10-year period, you could seize all their assets and send them to prison for life. In the 1980s, federal prosecutor Rudolph Giuliani led the famous Mafia commission trial, which targeted the leaders of all 5 families simultaneously. The trial lasted from February to November 1986. The courtroom was packed with journalists, spectators, and federal agents. The defendants, including the bosses of the Lucchese, Genovese, and Colombo families, sat stone-faced as prosecutors presented evidence that revealed the inner workings of the commission. The trial exposed the Concrete Club in explicit detail. Prosecutors played wiretap recordings of mob bosses discussing how to rig bids and divide up contracts. One tape captured Tony Dux Corallo, boss of the Lucchese family, explaining how the club operated. "We meet, we decide who gets the job, everybody else bids high. The winner kicks back 2%. Simple." Another tape, recorded in Paul Castellano's kitchen in Staten Island, captured him discussing a construction project at the Jacob Javits Convention Center. Castellano explained how the families were manipulating the concrete contracts, adding millions to the cost and splitting the profits. He talked about it casually, like he was discussing a legitimate business deal. The tapes didn't just convict individuals, they exposed the system. They proved that the Mafia wasn't just a collection of criminals, it was an invisible government that taxed the entire city. Every building, every road, every bridge, the mob took a cut. All the bosses were convicted. They received sentences ranging from 40 years to life. Their assets, homes, cars, businesses, bank accounts were seized. The Concrete Club was dismantled, the commission was shattered. For the first time in 50 years, the Mafia's power was broken, but not destroyed, never destroyed.
Here's the thing about the Gambino family. It didn't die, it adapted. After the RICO convictions and the fall of Gotti, the family went quiet. The flashy era was over. No more press conferences, no more celebrity bosses. The new leadership came from the Zips, Sicilian-born members who operated with the old-school discipline that Gotti had abandoned. Domenico Cefalu took over in the early 2000s. He was born in Palermo. He spoke Sicilian. He trusted no one outside the bloodline. Under his leadership, the family rebuilt its ties with the Sicilian Mafia, specifically the Inzerillo clan. These weren't just business partners. They were family, literal cousins. In 2019, Italian and American authorities coordinated a massive operation called New Connection. Over 200 agents conducted simultaneous raids in Palermo and New York. They arrested 19 members of the Gambino family and the Inzerillo clan. The investigation revealed that the transatlantic drug pipeline, dormant since the pizza connection case of the 1980s, had been quietly reactivated. Heroin and cocaine were flowing from South America through Sicily into New York. The drugs were hidden in shipping containers filled with legitimate cargo, olive oil, wine, canned tomatoes. The containers would arrive at the port of New York and New Jersey, where Gambino-connected longshoremen would lose them in the system. The drugs would be unloaded, distributed, and sold. The money, millions of dollars in cash, would be laundered through real estate, restaurants, and offshore accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. The family also diversified into new industries. They moved into cybercrime, online gambling sites that operated illegally, cryptocurrency fraud schemes that exploited the anonymity of blockchain technology. They hacked into corporate databases and sold stolen credit card information on the dark web. They ran phishing scams that targeted elderly victims, stealing life savings with fake emails and phone calls. The model was the same. The tools were different, but the Gambino family was still in business.
But if you think the Gambino family is a relic of the past, you haven't been paying attention to how they trade the ice pick for the keyboard. On October 23, 2025, federal authorities pulled back the curtain on an operation that looked more like a Silicon Valley startup than a mafia crew. The indictment targeted a sophisticated gambling ring involving members of the Gambino, Mangano, and Genovese families. They weren't just running cards in the back of a social club anymore. They were operating high-stakes, rigged games in the Hamptons and Las Vegas penthouses, preying on millionaires and figures connected to professional sports, including the NBA. The scheme used technology that would have baffled Carlo Gambino. Hidden cameras in the ceilings captured every card dealt in real time. Data was streamed to associates in backrooms who fed info to house players through invisible earpieces. The operation allegedly exploited insider information, injury reports, and locker room gossip to manipulate illegal betting lines. The investigation revealed that the modern mafia has a new face. They aren't just looking for your wallet. They are looking for a backdoor into professional sports and technology sectors where the margins are high and the risks are diluted by the fame of the victims. This wasn't about shaking down a dock worker for $50. This was about a $7 million digital heist. The Gambino family proved, once again, that while the tools of the trade change, the hunger for control is eternal. While the FBI was investigating the NBA scandal, another operation was targeting the family's traditional power base, the garbage industry. In New York and New Jersey, waste management is still controlled by the mob. It's one of the last industries where the old model still works. In November 2023, the FBI arrested 10 members of the Gambino family, including Captain Joseph Lanny. The charges were brutal: extortion, assault, witness intimidation. In one case, a competitor in the waste management business refused to pay protection money. 2 Gambino associates showed up at his office. They beat him with a hammer. They fractured his skull. They took photos of his injuries and circulated them to other business owners as a warning: pay up or you're next. The family operated a cartel. They divided up territories across Staten Island, Brooklyn, and northern New Jersey. They fixed prices. They eliminated competition. If you wanted to collect garbage in certain neighborhoods, you had to pay the Gambino family for the privilege. If you refused, your trucks were vandalized, your drivers were threatened, your contracts were stolen. Companies that didn't cooperate went bankrupt within months. In June 2024, the New York Attorney General indicted 17 more individuals for running a loan sharking and illegal gambling network out of Staten Island. The operation moved $22 million annually. They used ghost payrolls, fake employees on construction sites who existed only on paper. The paychecks went to mobsters. The scheme also involved mortgage fraud, where Gambino associates created fake identities to secure home loans, then defaulted on the payments and disappeared with the cash. These cases proved something important. The Gambino family isn't a relic. It's a living, breathing criminal enterprise. It controls entire industries. It corrupts unions. It infiltrates businesses. And it does all of this while operating in the shadows, away from the cameras, away from the headlines.
The Gambino family left a mark on American culture that goes far beyond crime. They became the template for every gangster movie, every mafia TV show, every true crime documentary. The Godfather was inspired by them. Goodfellas depicted their world. The Sopranos borrowed their structure and psychology. But the cultural fascination with the Mafia is complicated. On one hand, we see loyalty, family, honor. On the other hand, we see violence, corruption, betrayal. The truth is that the Gambino family offered something that legitimate society couldn't: a sense of belonging. For Italian immigrants who were marginalized, exploited, and discriminated against in early 20th century America, the Mafia provided protection, opportunity, and respect. But that protection came at a devastating cost. The family didn't just prey on outsiders, they preyed on their own communities. They extorted Italian shop owners who could barely afford to pay. They corrupted unions that were supposed to protect workers.
They flooded neighborhoods with drugs and gambling. They destroyed families while claiming to uphold family values. They demanded loyalty while betraying their own members. Carlo Gambino understood this duality. He presented himself as a man of respect, a protector of the community, a quiet grandfather who just wanted to provide for his family. But behind closed doors, he was building an empire on extortion, violence, and corruption. John Gotti rejected that duality. He embraced the image of the gangster, the outlaw, the rebel who lived by his own rules. And that's why he fell. Because the moment you step into the light, the moment you become visible, you become a target.
So what is the Gambino family today? It's not what it was in the 1970s under Carlo Gambino. It doesn't control entire industries the way it once did. It doesn't have the political connections it once enjoyed. The days of fixing mayoral elections and paying off police commissioners are over. But it's still here, operating in waste management, in construction, in gambling, in cybercrime. The FBI estimates that the Gambino family still has around 200 made members and more than 2,000 associates. They generate hundreds of millions of dollars annually. They've adapted to the digital age. They've rebuilt their Sicilian pipeline. They've learned from the mistakes of the Gotti era. They've learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to be patient. The family survived because it understood something fundamental about organized crime. It's not about being the loudest or the toughest. It's about being necessary. As long as there are industries that can be monopolized, unions that can be corrupted, and vices that people are willing to pay for, the Gambino family will find a way to profit. Carlo Gambino died a free man in his bed in 1976, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Albert Anastasia died in a barber's chair in 1957, his blood pooling on a checkered floor. John Gotti died alone in a prison cell in 2002, his empire reduced to memories and old newspaper clippings. But the empire itself? The empire never ended. It just learned to wear a tie. It learned to file taxes. It learned to operate through shell companies and legitimate businesses. It learned to hide in plain sight. The Gambino family isn't a ghost from the past. It's a blueprint for organized crime in the 21st century. And that's the truly dark part of this story. No matter how many bosses fall, no matter how many arrests are made, no matter how many RICO cases are prosecuted, the structure remains, the family remains, the empire remains. Because in the end, the Gambino family didn't just control crime, they controlled infrastructure, they controlled necessities. They became part of the invisible machinery that keeps cities running. The garbage gets collected, the concrete gets poured, the buildings go up. And somewhere, in the background, invisible and untouchable, the family takes its cut. That's the offer you can't refuse. Not because it's violent, not because it's dramatic, but because it's woven into the fabric of everyday life. Because it's inevitable. Because it's already there, operating in the shadows, waiting patiently for the next opportunity. The Gambino family. The dark empire that never fell. It just learned to disappear.